Hey, how's it going, guys? This is your boy Hazzed, and today I'm going to be doing a Mythic Plus guide for your Frost DKs to make sure you're doing enough DPS in those high-level Mythics. So, let's jump into this. Starting out, we're going to be taking a look at Frost DK talents. Now, these could obviously change based on what legendaries you have, but based on what I like to use and what legendaries I have, and I'm kind of looking for the damage that's going to deal the most overall consistency inside Mythic Pluses, since that's really going to be what matters when you get into, of course, higher rated Mythic Pluses. Now, what we got for the level 56 talent, we got Runic Attune, which is going to be your best way to go. It's going to get you 1 runic power, of course, on your auto attacks, which is going to be quite a bit in a long run for keeping up consistency, especially when it comes to single target with this spec, since I lean, of course, in Mythic Pluses more towards AoE, unless of course for some reason we have to go more single target, and that becomes more beneficial of cleaving or hitting one target down than cleaving down a bunch. Of course, there's a couple afflictions that'll stop you from being able to AoE all the time. So the level 57 talent is going to be Murderous Efficiency. That's going to be another, of course, consistency talent there. Another thing is going to keep up your DPS in the long run in boss fights, and of course keep up your consistent damage when it comes to actually hitting a target, which is going to actually grant us quite a bit of damage, especially with this style of spec. Now, as for the level 58 talent, I like to run Ice Cap for the cooldown reduction, obviously, because it's going to let us burst quicker, which when it comes down to overall DPS instead of burst DPS, that's what we're going to be running. Now, the two things that could change up based on whether or not you want to deal more AoE or more consistency on bosses and stuff, like this week I believe we have Tyrannical on the keystones, and that's going to make bosses have like 40% more health. You may need more single target in your group than you need more AoE, so or vice versa. So you could go like Freezing Fog, Avalanche to do more burst DPS in places that you need it, or you know, you could stick with this, which will grant you more consistency overall, which that's what I definitely like. That's what I've seen that definitely works in Mythic Plus is trying to have as much consistency as possible, because you don't do Mythic Pluses like you would originally do a normal dungeon. You really need to burst more and just do consistent DPS less. You got to be more involved. It's always changing. You got to be. There's just more to it, obviously, than just not bursting on the ads and then bursting on bosses to get them down, and then so on and so forth. Now, as for the level 60 talent, that doesn't really matter that much. As for the level 75 talent, you can go Permafrost for a little more survivability against melee if you're going to be taking cleave damage, or you could take Volatile Shielding, which will grant you more, of course, magic generation based on damage taken, which can come in handy, especially in certain situations. And as it comes to Frost DKs, we can dispel a lot of that stuff with our anti-magic cell, being able to absorb more. Would be quite amazing, obviously. Now, as for the level 90 talent, you do not want to drop off Gathering Storms, basically no matter what you do. You can deal quite a bit of Frostscythe damage outside of that if you have like the right artifact and stuff like that, but otherwise I would say resort to sticking with the single target gain unless you have the legendary ring, Soul of the Death Lord. Now, as for the level 100 talent, we're going to be taking Obliteration, which is going to give us a lot more consistent damage on our Frostscythe, which is going to give us a lot more AoE. And it's only like a 1.5 minute cooldown. It's also going to be quite a bit of burst damage when it comes to opening up on any kind of boss target, which ends up being really well. Now, the other thing, as you can see, since I'm rocking the ring, it's going to give me Gathering Storms and Frostscythe, which is going to be a major combo for this AoE, and we're going to be able to deal an insane amount of cleave damage. Now, obviously, the other legendary I'm rocking is the Helm, which, in my opinion, if I could choose, I definitely wouldn't be rocking the Helm. I'd be rocking the bracers. So if you have those, slap those beasts on definitely instead of that Helm, but I'm gonna be sticking with that, so I get a lot more Remorseless Winter damage and Howling Blast damage from Remorseless Winter. So legendaries are going to be key based upon how you're going to play. Obviously, your talents, what rotation you're going to want to use, things like that I'll go ahead and try to cover for you guys. Maybe by switching it off, taking off a few pieces of gear, switching around some legendaries, putting on single target legendaries, things like that. So let's jump into some rotation. Alright, as you can see guys, I'm going to be using Black Rook Hold Normal Mode as an example. Make sure that pats aren't coming down. They are. So I'll go ahead and explain a couple things before we pull this two-man pack right here. Now, when running Frostscythe, pulling a two-man pack or DPSing a two-man pack is kind of a gamble when using Frostscythe. You can stick to your normal rotation, which throwing up Remorseless Winter and slapping on Fat Obliterates is kind of the safe way to go. But if you're throwing Frostscythe and you either are getting crits, you know, generating crit procs, killing machine procs, or just getting raw crits can benefit you a lot more than just doing the raw DPS with Obliterate. Now, if there's only 2 targets, if you want to be on the safe side, start off with 1 or 2 Obliterates, maybe 1 to generate kind of an amping up on your Remorseless Winter to make sure that ticks a little more, and then go into your Frostscythe. Now, go ahead and hope for a proc off the opener. We'll go ahead and go on these 2. Now, chances are your team's not going to mess up on a 2-man pull. It's pretty simple. Your tank's going to come over here, hit him with some AoE, but I'm just going to run in like a crazy man. Now, I'm not going to burst on these guys, obviously, because it's pretty small. And we did benefit a bit there from our cleave damage. We got up to about 1.8, 1.9 mil. We didn't burst on him. Very smooth. If it went on a lot longer, obviously we just spam Frostscythe and be able to deal that much damage again. Now, when it comes to a 4-man cleave, this is going to be when this spec definitely benefits a lot more than this single target spec, since there's so many targets. Obviously, we're going to run in, throw up Remorseless Winter, and then we're going to start Frost cleaving. I'm going to go ahead and blow 1 Obliteration, Frostscythe, Obliteration, Frostscythe, Frost Strike, Obliteration. It just decimates. It just decimates. Alright, as you can see right there, our proc damage is about 3 mil. It's got about a 1.5 minute cooldown on that. We got about a minute cooldown, of course, on our pillar. You know, we're heading into this second pull. You may be able to blow those multiple times, of course, within the current fights. If they were a bit more elongated, it would show it a little better. But for this next pull, I'm going to wait till I get my burst up again. And just basically rinse and repeat all the way through the dungeon. It's very easy to do this, very simple with burst macros. And you can deal a ton of AoE pressure. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing here without Obliteration. Alright, blowing cooldowns, throwing up Frostscythe. We finally got a Howling Blast proc, and then we just go ahead and AoE these down. Obviously, they're going to get caught in a stun there, and that's going to be the end of them, doing about 2.3 mil damage. Now, with this spec, as you can see, your main goal with every pull, because of Ice Cap, is to basically have up your at least Pillar of Frost on every initiation on the fight, because that's when you're going to deal a lot of your highest DPS, and you're going to end up dwarfing a lot of your team's DPS, really raising up your overall damage. Also, since we don't get much downtime with Frostscythe, it's very easy to keep up the consistency from there. So same thing with this group. I'm going to mob in right there, just start AoEing the crud out of them, pop Obliteration, and kill him. Also, based on the difficulty of dungeon and whether or not it's tyrannical, I may not completely pop Obliteration. Obviously, I wouldn't use Sindragosa's Fury because the boss is in the next room. And with it being tyrannical, the dungeon bosses being harder, I would probably wait to use some of my larger cooldowns before I get into this room. Also, determining how high and how low your DPS is of your group is also going to determine whether or not you're going to go full ham with your cooldowns or wait till the next fight, because they may not need your cooldowns, but timer is also on the clock, so you really got to decide. So running into this pull, we're going to do the same thing here. Run in, AoE the crud out of them, move on to the next one. Alright, running in, we're going to pull this guy out here, pop an anti-magic shell because I'm going to take caster damage here, and just throwing out that same AoE. Make sure you do not put your back to any of them, otherwise you're going to miss the cleave there. As you saw, I missed the first cleave on the guy in the back, and I didn't get that much damage off. Now our cooldowns are rolling. We cleared through that faster than we would if it was a higher Mythic Plus, otherwise we'd have IBF back up, or Pillar of Frost, I mean, and we'd be able to continually pop our cooldowns on each pull. And that's how I deal 2 million plus consistency inside Mythic plus dungeons on my DK. It's really easy to do. I mean, it's really not too challenging at the moment. Obviously, with the afflictions, it can change based on characters. It can change, but now we're gonna address a little bit different things, like how to deal more single target, of course, while keeping up your AoE, and Mythic Plus is changing it up a little bit and talking about legendaries for single target. Alright, so when it comes to single target DPS with this spec, how are you going to burst on something inside PvE? Well, first off, you're going to run in at the target. I'm not going to do it right now because I want to talk about a couple other things. Before we do that, we're going to run in on the target. We're going to pop, of course, potions of prolonged power. We're going to throw up our basic cooldown right before we reach him. And the first thing we're going to do is pop Remorse's Winter and start slapping our face on Obliterate. Now, don't use Frostscythe single target unless you have a guaranteed crit proc. Otherwise, it's not going to end up very well. Now, remember, we are running the consistency spec, so we will have a full rotation regardless of, you know, not using Frostscythe. It will turn out okay. When should you pop Obliteration? I'd say usually when I pop Obliteration is after I become rune starved, and then I pop Empower with Obliteration, but I make sure I use a Frost Strike right before I do that, so I can literally dump in a guaranteed Obliterate crit, and then use a Frost Strike, Obliterate crit, Frost Strike, Obliterate crit after that. And if you get, of course, a Howling Blast, you don't have to resort to using your Frost Strike. You can go from Howling Blast to Obliterate to a proc to Howling Blast again. And it ends up being a really good burst for single target during the start of the fight. And it does give you a little bit consistency, and it also is the best for consistency overall raid DPS for single target. Now, if you're running Mythic Pluses, and let's say you don't have certain legendaries. Let's say you have, let's see, the Seal of Necro, which does change things a little bit, because if you have Seal of Necro, your single target burst inside Mythic Pluses, since the fights are not 5 minutes plus, you could go with Hungering Rune Weapon, or you could go with Breath of Sindragosa to burst on the targets for a lot of DPS to increase a lot of your damage. Now, you could go Breath of Sindragosa and rotate the cooldown every 2 minutes inside of PvE, also on multi-adds, to deal quite a bit of AoE DPS instead of using, of course, this ring for Frostscythe. That's a pretty good way to actually substitute it out, but the 2-minute cooldown is not very good for consistency, and that's something you're really going to need inside of Mythics, obviously. Now let's say you have the legendary bracers and the chest piece. Obviously those two are going to be the best for consistency. It's also going to be the highest burst you'll probably get out of any of the specs. That frickin' chest piece plus the bracers is just so powerful. It's absolutely insane. I wish I had those bracers, but overall one of the strongest, I'd say definitely one of the strongest besides the bracers, as far as mythics go, is going to be Soul of the Death Lord when it comes to Frost DKs, just as you saw that AoE. So, I mean, really all I'm doing is playing a single target spec, but it's built into with the AoE ring, so I can get an insane amount of AoE on every pull. It kind of matches me up with a lot of Unholy DKs. Otherwise, without this ring, without going double talents, it becomes almost impossible to keep up with the Unholy DK's cleaving ability. You know, and that's why a lot of people on a lot of high-level Mythic Pluses generally don't look at Frost DKs. So you got to find a way to make up for that. But yeah, having like Seal of Necro and going double Hungering Rune Weapon, really good for single target. Really good for single target. Now I'm going to open up on this guy and do some single target DPS here. We're going to be popping, of course, Prolonged Potion of Power. You know, of course, if we went Avalanche, Freezing Fog, things like that, we can generate higher burst, especially with Hungering Rune Weapon. But with this spec, you're going to keep your single target is basically just going to be consistent. It's going to be nice and consistent. It's not going to be anything insane unless you get a Sindragosa proc, because you don't have the legendary chest on. You're not going to be getting a huge crit off of that also. So it's going to be pretty mediocre, but not low enough that you're going to hate it. Alright, so we're going to dump in those Obliterates. We did get a proc right there. We don't even have to use that. We're going to throw out, again, our big dragon and just keeping consistent DPS on him. We got hit by Harvester there a second. Don't do that in high-level Mythics. That's bad. And we're going to finish him off right there. As you can see, we got about 2 million DPS on this guy. Not terrible. It could be better. It could be better for single target cleave, for single target damage. But it's not the greatest for that, as I was talking about. I could simply switch out the other legendary ring for that one and deal a lot more single target damage based on that haste. But luckily in Mythic Pluses, boss fights are not the hardest part of the dungeon, in my opinion. It always comes down to the trash DPS and how much people mess up on the affliction seems to be what affects higher level Mythic Pluses than the actual content. So be aware of that. And also the AoE pull. So that's how I keep up, you know, like 1.5 to 2 mil consistency inside Mythic Pluses. Is pretty simple. Just kind of switch around your specs based on your legendary, but this is what I found out works the best. And let me know down in the comments below if you enjoyed the guide this way, if you didn't enjoy it this way, if you'd like me to do it a different way, talk about single target DPS. Let me know, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. Leave a like. Until next time, this was your boy Hazzed.